Hello, and welcome to the first co-host corner episode of Code and Pixels. My name is Kelly, and I'm once again joined by my amazing co-host, Adekunle.
Thanks, Kelly. Today, we're going to be chatting about front-end dependency management. So it should be a interesting episode. Kelly, what would you say is a good overview of like front-end dependencies? And you could talk about it generally or and specifically for design systems.
Just to start off with, what are front-end dependencies? So when you're working in a code base, you need to rely on another package. You're depending on things that come out of that package. You can also have internal dependencies, which your own packages will generate. And it's all just a nice little ecosystem of how all these packages talk to each other and how you leverage them in your code base.
Oh yeah, I was explaining this to a designer and I thought about it how like in the natural environment where each animal depends on another animal. So, in order for chickens to eat, you need worms. In order for worms to be around, you need like plants and whatnot. It's a case where it's like, it's all good when it works, but when it doesn't work, it's like a total nightmare. That's how I think about dependencies because regardless what we do, especially within web development, you're always going to have some sort of dependency when you're using React. You're dependent on a bunch of these smaller dependencies and whatnot. So it gets very hairy sometimes. I'm wondering like from a design system perspective, like what's the importance of like front-end dependencies?
First of all, I love the animal analogy, and now I'm hungry, but not for worms. For design systems, I can talk from when I was first starting out with using them. A lot of the times you want to use something that's already been established over and over again, and you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Maybe you need a certain hook that another open source library has generously offered. So pulling something like that in is great. One of the tricky things that I learned along the way was especially creating examples in Storybook. And you have your stories, and your stories want to use components, and then that creates its own separate set of issues where suddenly you have to figure out how to pull in those components in your design system without creating circular dependencies. Have
I,
you come across that fun little debacle? Why don't you give us a rundown? What is a circular dependency?
correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it the kind of case where a dependency is dependent on the dependencies and that second dependency is depending on that first dependency? Is
Yeah,
that correct?
yeah. And why is that an issue?
Because I'm assuming like you get to a point where, sorry, I'm like thinking about it. I was like, it's like a worm eating another worm. And
Or is like the snake eating itself?
yeah, you get to a point where I guess there's no real resolution. Like I'm wondering like if that's right, but I know it's bad. Like in the beginning of my career, I was like, I'm just gonna use any dependency. Let's go. Let's just pull it in. Even though some of it hasn't been used in 2 years or it hasn't been updated in 2 years, I was like, yeah, let's just like YOLO it.
So some tools can help identify the issues that come around with that. Specifically, like when we migrated to using NX for our build system, it comes with a really useful visual graph tool that you can use, and it'll show you how all your dependencies like flow. And that makes it really nice because I don't want to look through just like a list. I'm a visual person, so just seeing like this map of the arrows pointing, and you can see, oh, that arrow's pointing into itself. That's no good. So NX is really picky about that stuff. So if you have circular dependencies, it's going to complain. Depending on your package manager, some package managers will hoist. And what that means is if you have your dependency in a place, it'll be like, oh, I know that exists there. I'm going to be able to reference that no matter what package I'm in. So it's the concept of hoisting the dependency. Some package managers like npm don't like that. What ends up happening is you might be in a repo that uses something like Yarn, which does support hoisting, and you'll migrate over to pnpm, and suddenly everything's yelling at you and you won't know why. It's because you might not have all those dependencies listed in your individual package.
I ran into issues a lot where For example, I want to use our design system has like the latest version of React, and also we're using like, let's say, Tanner Stack Table version 10. And then you start to, oh, I want to integrate it into this product. And then they're using a different version. So it's like it gets to a weird place where you have to like, in order to use this, like the latest version, you have to complete the side quest. And sometimes the side quest has another side quest. And you end up in the place where it's okay, I gotta update all these packages so just so I could use like this one component and whatnot. So it definitely could get very jarring and whatnot, but it'd be great to know how to alleviate that. But
That's when resolutions becomes your BFF and you start to just add everything to your resolutions list.
and for folks that don't know the resolution list, like how would you describe that?
So a lot of the times what you just described, you have a dependency that relies on another dependency and it relies on there's like a chain of versions that everything relies on. Your resolutions list is a way to resolve essentially all of that noise into we're going to use this version. So it's great for issues when you have a bunch of that chaining that you want to just say, no, just resolve it to this version. It's also great when you have a package that relies on another package, like in your own system, like you want to resolve that to ensure there aren't any clashes. It's nice, but also a slippery slope because then suddenly you're just repeating everything in the resolutions list. And then one day you wake up and you have to keep resolving your resolutions and then you realize you've made a big mistake.
Wow, that sounds like interception where you're like resolving resolutions. It feels like the more you go in, like the harder it is to come out of it happy and alive. And I know there's always a different approaches to not having to rely directly on third party libraries. So the idea of vendoring where let's say I'm using like a specific version of Axios or whatnot, and instead of installing via npm, I'm just downloading all of Axios, hosting it into like my repo, and then I'm just importing that into my code base. But again, that has its own disadvantages and whatnot. But I think the next topic that we have is around like canary versioning. What's your thoughts on that?
For anyone not familiar with canaries, they are birds, but specifically in this context, when you're working on a feature and you just want to test it out, what you can generate is something called a canary version. So it is published somewhere, but it's not an official released version. What you can do with that canary is you can pull that in to another library just to confirm your changes work. So, what's interesting about this is it sounds simple at first, and for the most part, it is. But what you can end up happening is you pull in your canary, and that canary generates a separate canary. And then you have a series of canaries that all need to be chained together in a series of libraries. I'm wondering if you have any tips or tricks to managing potentially a long pipeline of testing and validating these new updates.
First thing is when I was doing research on canaries and like where it came from, I was distraught because I'm assuming they will put canaries in the mine, and if they died, that means it was like not. It was a way to test if it's like safe, and I was like, damn, that's kind of messed up. But besides that, yeah, I've used the strategy very not as often to the point where it's because I ran into a situation where it's like you have that like canaries depending on canaries and whatnot. And is it, correct me wrong, is a canary like the same thing as like having something that's like experimental, or is that something that's totally different?
It depends on how you're using it because they all do get uploaded, like they get referenced. It depends on what your cleanup cycle looks like. For example, if you're using something like Artifactory and all your versions are stored up there, you might have a rule where you remove canaries after X amount of months or so just to make sure you don't have a billion packages just floating around. So you just want to be mindful of something like that, understand what the policy is for any cleanup of any unused official packages.
Interesting. Like I'm a, yeah, this might be wrong, but I normally don't version canary versions. So the reason why I say this is, and again, I don't, if canary and experimental is the same thing, but the idea where it's like, the assumption is like, whatever, if you're using this, like it's might break in the future, regardless if I make an update or I support a particular feature and now I don't support the feature. I was like, if you're opting into a canary version, then that's something that you should expect. But I think it definitely differs if I'm working at like a small size company versus supporting like thousands of applications, because I feel like that's when you probably need to have versioning for different canary versions and whatnot, because you might have one team using one thing and another team using another one. And you're like, all right, let's make it stable enough that it doesn't break like their bake the features on their repos and whatnot. But I would try to use like the most simple approach, because especially around creating experiments, because I try not to get tied down by process too much. I was like, hey, someone wants to use something, cool, let's just make an experimental or canary version of it and have them use it, and then they can give us feedback on what works, what doesn't work, and then we can have a quick iteration process. But again, it might be different if you're like supporting like thousands of like developers and whatnot.
When it's a canary, it's just validating the theory of does this work? And then when it actually graduates to a real experiment, typically we do what we call like a next release or alpha or beta, whatever, however you want to like the name of your release, so that it is more official than just a canary.
Gotcha. So is it like Canary, Alpha, and then Stable? Is that how it
Kind of,
goes?
yeah. Yeah.
See, I was just guessing, but
It's however long your testing strategy needs to bake and verify.
I like that. Yeah, let's talk about versioning limits. What's your thoughts on it? Good or
Yes,
bad?
when you're pulling in a dependency, you can say what the rules are for what version you're pulling in. So for example, you might say, "Hey, I'm good with anything past version 1.2.3." So that's like a free fall. If it's past this version, we're all gravy, it's all good. Sometimes you want to limit that. I don't want any new majors because majors imply a breaking change. So only give me everything 1.x at that point. Sometimes you want it even more granular. I only want patches, or I only want this.
Yeah, I think for me, it's anything above like major or breaking changes. I think that should be a case where there should be limits. Like minor patch, like it doesn't really affect me because I'm a patch. It means like it's this code is like going to fix a bug that's happening in minor same thing. So it's the case where it's like I'm good with that. I know like in some libraries they're like very strict where it's like it can't be over if I'm using version 2.2.2 and they'll give you limits of, oh, it's only like patch release when I'm like, okay, so what do I have to do? Like what is the problem and whatnot? So I always try to keep it simple, and obviously depending on the like who you're serving, you might need to go that far, but I feel like the right limit is like just limiting to like major versioning, because again, major means breaking. So we're saying that, hey, if there's a breaking change, it's going to be some sort of refactoring that you have to do.
I think that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I think it's very important, especially like if you run into these issues, have some sort of way to like visualize it, because I also think it works not only for circular dependencies, but also if you're wondering like, hey, why is like my package like so large and whatnot, you can figure out like what is importing what, and you can figure out like, oh wait, do I need to import this, or should this be importing all these components or all these like functions? Can I just import one, or one at a time? I'm a plus one to like having some sort of like visual tool to help you with that, because it is hard to figure it out while you're like within the code base itself.
I totally agree. And something like for tooling, other than the graph thing I brought up, Volta has also been a useful tool for. So Volta is a way to not just for dependencies, but just for installing and helping folks be on the same version of tooling. So in so generally what you want to have is something like Volta for Yarn or PNPM or your package manager, you want to have those versions in there so that when other users or even your CI can use whatever version that you are using with Volta.
I'm wondering, like, are there any other tools that you think is useful for just for dependency management?
I remember I was studying there's a convenient little table on the PNPM doc site that says which version of PNPM is compatible with the Node version. So I would just say one of the most valuable tools is not technically a tool, it's documentation. And yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, I love
So
that. I agree too, where documentation is like, it has to be like part of the process overall because again, you might have someone that has all the tribal knowledge and whatnot, and like all the knows all the skeletons in the closet and whatnot. But I think when you document it, like it's always good because person might not be here, so you just want to have that be as visible as possible. And again, for me, if I'm onboarding, I know how seriously y'all taking it seriously about like how or even like the culture in general is by the documentation. So do you have the documentation on? I worked in a place where we had a front-end platform team and they were in charge of all the dependencies and whatnot, and they document how they evaluate like which dependency to use within the application. And it was very helpful because like for me, I'm like, I just use whatever package that gets the job done. But then when I read that, I was like, oh, okay, I gotta pay attention to like how many issues they have and like how many like how long has it been since it had like a major version and all this stuff. It's always good because that all that stuff will tell you if you tell you like whether to use a package or not and whatnot. But yeah, I'm wondering like, are there any other best practices for operating like at like a larger scale application? Because I feel like it becomes more important for larger companies versus smaller companies. But I'm wondering, what's your thoughts on that?
I think making it clear and you're going back to the docs, like what are at least like the third party dependencies that you're using and making sure you have comments in there that kind of explain. I love comments. I'm a pro comment in my code base advocate. I know
Oh no, you're one of those
I'm
people
one
that
of
like to write an
I'm one of those
essay.
people. I'm one of those people because when I'm going through a file, I'm like, why did they do this? And sometimes I don't want to copy and paste into an AI to tell me what's going on. Like sometimes just some text is super helpful. I know with everything's AI these days, a good old-fashioned comment, I love it. And the code that AI generates has comments. So I know if we're going through the AI pipeline of working and it's generating the comments, I say let's put all the comments in the code. But yeah, I would say just keeping your team informed. It shouldn't be one person shouldn't be like the dependency SME. I've seen that happen a lot where, some issue comes up with a dependency. Go talk to this person. And if someone is making a PR and they're adding a dependency, it becomes the team's ownership of that's now part of the maintenance and the accountability. So I would say just when you're reviewing a PR and you see a new dependency added, there should at least be some documentation in the PR that indicates why the dependency is being added, just to look it up because one day someone's gonna go, hey, why did we add this?
I'm a big user of Git blame, so if I see something
Get
and
blame or get shame.
it's both, I call people out. Sometimes it's me. I'm like, oh shoot, who added this? And I was like, wait a minute. So that's a life lesson. You're not only writing these comments for other people, but you're also writing for your future self because you might not remember why you added this dependency, and there might be a logical reason why. I'm a big fan of that. Like some people like write comments, talk about what they're doing, but I think leaving it up to the why, like why is this here? Why are we using this package? Why we're like doing it this way is always the best way to handle a lot of this stuff because again, if you have a big team there's gonna be cases where you might be working on something and then you might go work on something else and you come back and you're like, wait, what the hell is going on? Why is it kitchen so messy. So it's a good way, I think.
So, Adeline, do you want to share your closing thoughts on dependencies and dependency management?
For sure. I think anytime you are building something and you want to import a dependency, do your research on it, see if it's widely used, see if it is, see the issue count, see how frequently it's updated. And then once you decide to use that, like also thinking about not depending on that dependency in like directly. So create some sort of like internal code that imports that dependency so that like you can change when needed. So one example is, oh, I'm using like the fetch API, but I know that in the future I might use something else. So I'll just have a file that uses the fetch API and then I'm able to use that code. And then once, let's say I want to use Axios in the future, then I could go in that one file and update it there versus updating in multiple places. And I do the same thing with design systems too. So I don't import directly from the actual component library. I use this facade pattern of importing it only one time. And then if I need to make the changes, make global changes, I just do it from that one file. So I'd say that those are like my closing thoughts.
So, copy and paste.
Oh yeah, copy pasta. That's all I'm out.
So, opposite of dry, just write everything twice. No, I think that's a great point because that is true. You get that full ownership. You're no longer dependent on the dependency. So it's all hack. I love it. So yeah, for me, I would say echo everything I definitely mentioned. I would say keep those docs updated. Be mindful of what you are depending on because yeah, I've seen some repos just die and then you're left with an unmaintained nightmare. So then you end up copying and pasting or patching or doing whatever you need to do. So it's a double-edged sword really because it can be good because you're getting the perks of code that's already out there and tested and validated elsewhere, but also scary because you don't know if a breaking change gets introduced. So it's always a balancing game of how you want to go about doing that. Yeah. I guess let's close out on that and have a great day.
See ya. We want to thank you for tuning into this episode. For more content, feel free to explore our previous episodes on codeandpixels.fm. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to connect with us on social media at Code and Pixels FM. Y'all have a great day.